Masechet Beisah, Daf 21, a few really important topics today, especially regarding cooking for a pet or cooking for a non-Jew on Yom Tov, which we brought up yesterday. It's going to come up a lot more on this stuff. And in general, dual use actions. So here we'll start off. This is a good example right at the beginning. Behema, so you have an animal that's jointly owned in partnership between a Jew and a non-Jew. And now you decide that you agree that you're going to do shechita and kill the animal on Yom Tov, and then both people will eat it. So is that permitted or not? See, if only a Jew owns it, then of course it's allowed because the Jew's going to eat it. But in this case, because half of it is not yours, so is that permitted? Amar le mutar. So Rav Huna answered Rav Avia, the elder. He said it's permitted. Amar le v'chi ma ben zeh lindarim undavot. Now he asks a good question. Rav Avia, the elder, said, "Isn't this the same as slaughtering voluntary offerings in the Bet HaMikdash, which we said is not allowed, even according to Bet Hillel in the interpretation of Ula?" Right, and that seems to be the main opinion. So even Bet Hillel does not allow these types of offerings, and these are shelamim. These are offering peace offerings, which means that part of it goes on the mizbeach and part of it the owner eats. And so that's kind of like the same thing. It's an animal that's in partnership, and the Jew eats part of it, and the rest goes to the Bet HaMikdash, to the mizbeach. So if this is allowed between a Jew and a non-Jew, then all the more so it should be allowed if it's comparable to something owned by a regular Jew and the rest is to the Mizbeach. Amar le, what about parach? And Rav Huna's answer is, look, a bird over there. Look at that raven. In other words, he's changing the subject. He's distracting Rav Avia Sava. He doesn't want to answer the question. Okay, so this is kind of like a little comic relief here. So then Rav Avia left. His distraction worked, and he was talking about other things, and he didn't answer the question. So when he left, Rav Huna's son said, wasn't that Rav Avia the elder? And you praised him. You said he's a great sage. So how come you treated him like that and you changed the subject? Usually you do that to someone who's unworthy and you don't want to bother spending time, or they're not going to understand what you're saying. And so you give them a simple answer. But he's a great man. How come you didn't give him an answer? This is, what can I do? I'm exhausted. And he quotes the pasuk from Shir Hashirim. Let me lean against a tree. Let me crouch among the apple trees. In other words, I've been busy all day and working and teaching, and maybe taught all day for a long shiur. He has other responsibilities, and this is a very subtle matter, and it requires a lot of reason and explanation. And I just didn't have the head for it, so that's why it wasn't meant to be an insult to him. I just didn't answer it. All right, so that's the story. But now we want to know what is this difference between the two cases? So regarding an animal that's jointly owned, anytime if you want to eat even one kizayit, you have to do shechita on the whole thing. Even if I own the whole animal and I want to eat one steak, so I have to do shechita on the whole animal. There's no way I can't just take part of it. And so in any case, and I'm not going to eat every part of the fats and all the parts of the animal in any way. So therefore, I'm permitted to do shechita on an entire big cow, even if I'm only going to eat part. And therefore, it doesn't matter that part of it is owned by the non-Jew. The non-Jew will take his half and he'll do whatever he wants with it. He can make his own barbecue. It has nothing to do with me. The shechita itself is permitted because I need it for what I want. Good. Aval nedarim undavot asur l'shachatan b'yom tov tekohanim ki kazachu meshulchan gavoa kazachu. This is an amazing answer regarding communal peace offerings, regarding peace offerings that are voluntary, that one takes part of it. The kohanim eat part of it, the owner eats part of it. those are not jointly owned. It's not that I have half and the Kohanim have half and the Mizbeach has its part. No, really, it's really the Shulchan Gavoa Kazachu. I'm giving the whole animal to Gavoa, to Hashem. And then from that, the law says that Hashem grants us, the Kohanim and the owners, permission to take part of it. But it's not, I don't even own it at all. I'm really giving the whole thing, and as if the Mishkan is sharing some with us. And so therefore, at the time I do shechita, I'm doing shechita on an animal that wholly belongs to Hashem and not to me. And that's why that is not permitted, only if it's an obligatory offering, and like we saw in the past few days. And that's the difference between a communal offering. So this is really important to conceptualize. I'm not eating my own animal when I bring a shalamim. It's kind of like Hashem is inviting me to his meal to share along as his guest. And that's a very nice way to think of it. Okay, now that we mentioned that, Amar Rav Chisda behema chatzer shel goy v'chatzer shel Yisrael mutar l'shachata b'yom tov. Rav Chisda says, I agree with that an animal jointly owned by a Jew and non-Jew, you can do shechita. The reason we just gave, you have to do shechita on a whole animal, even if you only want just one olive size. Lisa, however, a dough which is jointly owned by a Jew and non-Jew, asur le'efotah b'yom tov. I'm not allowed to put it in the oven and bake it. Because in that case, I can divide it. I go to my partner. I said, listen, it's Yom Tov today. I can't cook on your behalf. So let's split it. And you take your half and I'm going to take my half. And then I can bake my half separately. So since there is a way for me to do the melacha that's only mine and not have to cook for him, therefore that I have to do that. And I can't cook for him. That's different from an animal where you can't split an animal before you do shechita. You have to do it on the entire thing. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. Here, however, we have an objection to this law that dough cannot be separated. We're going to quote a long Mishnah that includes this law and says the opposite. Mativ Rav Hana bar Chanilai lisat kelavim bizman she'aro'in ochlin mimena hayevet behala. ומערבין בה, ומשתתפין בה, ומברכין עליה, ומזמנין עליה, ונאפת ביום טוב, ואדם יעשה בה ידי חובתו בפסח. So here we have a dough that is made with your intention that you're going to feed it to the dogs. In other words, it's very coarse, like super whole wheat, but it's edible to human beings. The shepherds, they're taking care of the sheep with the dogs. And so the shepherds would eat it too. So it's not really horrible bread. So it is edible to humans. So it's kind of like similar to the previous case where it might be eaten by both humans and the dogs. And so what is the status of this dough? You have to take challah, because since it is somewhat edible to human beings, you have to take challah. And you can use it for an eruv. You can use it for a shituf mevaot. In other words, it's considered like a human meal. And you can put it in one person's courtyard to join all the courtyards. You say a beracha on it. You could say zimun and berkat hamazon on it. You can cook it on Yom Tov. So that's what we're going to talk about. And you can use it, if you make it as chametz, as matzah, you can use it on Pesach. And now here's our question. Why don't you say the same logic in this case, that I can separate it so that I'll say, okay, this portion is for the human beings, the shepherds, and that portion is for the dogs. And in that case, I would not be allowed to bake the whole thing on Yom Tov, because since part of it is going to be eaten by dogs, so I have to separate it first, and I can't bake the entire thing, just like the case of when it was owned jointly by a Jew and a non-Jew. That's the question. And the answer is, when I'm making the dough for a dog, I have in the back of my mind, you know what? If I get if an animal dies and I find it, you know what? I'll feed that dead animal the nevela to a dog. It's not kosher anyway. I can't eat it. And that way, I'll fill up the dogs with that, since it's worthless to me. And then the humans will eat the entire dough. So even when I'm making the dough, there is a possibility that the entire dough will be eaten by humans, and therefore I don't have to split it up. That's different from the one that's half owned by a Jew and half owned by a non-Jew, where the non-Jew is for sure going to take his half and go ahead and eat it. So in that case, I have to separate it. In this case, I don't. Okay, so this would be the answer, and this is all. This was a challenge to Rav Chisda. So this we gave that answer for Rav Chisda. Here's the problem. Does Rav Chisda have this principle that you say since? No, since there's a possibility that a nevela may show up, so therefore I'm allowed to do it right now, even though right now there's no nevela. Rav Chisda, in another case, does not use the principle of ho'il. What's that other case? You're probably familiar with it. Rav Chisda amar loke, Rabba amar eno loke. Someone who cooks on Yom Tov for the next day, that's chol. So you're not allowed to do that, preparing from one day to the next. Rav Chisda says, if you did it, you get malkut. Rabba says you don't get lashes. What's the reason? Rav Chisda amar loke, lo amrinan ho'il mikla ele orchim chazile. Let's explain Rabba first. It's easier. Rabba says you don't give lashes to the person, even though he shouldn't do that, because we say the principle of since. Since guests might come, who knows? So, and then I'll have a lot of food. So therefore, even on Yom Tov, I can cook a lot of food for 20 people, even though I'm not expecting any guests, because once in a while, surprise guests happen to come. And they went for a walk and they come over. So since I could be possible, therefore I don't get flogged. Rav Chisda disagrees and he says we do not say this principle of since it's only a possibility, therefore that permits me to do it even now. So you say that since Rav Chisda does not have the since principle in that case of cooking from Yom Tov to Chol, so too he will not agree with this answer that we gave here for him, that would say that since an animal may die and I find a nevela and I could feed that to the dogs, and therefore I would eat the whole dough, the whole bread myself. But that's only a remote possibility, and he doesn't take that into account. So rather, in the answer we gave for him, take out it's possible that an animal will come that I'll find a nevela. Rather, we're talking about a case where I know that there's a nevela out there, and I know that I can feed that to the dogs. So therefore, even while I am cooking this coarse dough, although generally it's kind of fit for dog food, nevertheless, the dogs have their own food. And the shepherds may very well eat the entire dough. So since that's the most likely outcome, it's all going to be human food, and that's why it's allowed, and I don't have to split it in that case. All right, so we kind of watered down the answer so much to a case where the dogs are not going to eat it, but I suppose that still has some applicability. That once I do it for humans, and humans could eat it, then perhaps you could give some to the dogs as well. All right, and now we have a related question. One time, there's Jewish residents of a certain village. Some soldiers came and b'nei chela, and they said, "You have to supply us with bread." Right. So the military comes and they come to live in a place, and then the residents have to provide bread for them, and it happened to be over Yom Tov. So now the residents are asking Rav Huna, what should we do? We have these non-Jewish soldiers who we are ordered to feed. Okay, fine, we're fine with doing that, but by cooking on Yom Tov, we're cooking for non-Jews. So is that allowed? Or we have to tell them, sorry, we can't do it for you on Yom Tov. Amar le chazena. You have to see if they're nice soldiers or mean soldiers. If they would give a bread to a child and they wouldn't mind, right? And so if the soldiers wouldn't mind sharing some of their bread with a Jewish kid, then it's permitted, because for each and every loaf, you could say, well, I'm baking this one. Maybe they'll share it with one of the kids. Soldiers, they like little kids. Maybe it reminds them of their kids at home, and then it would be okay. But if the soldiers are mean and they would not allow themselves and they would not share it with the Jewish kids, then you're cooking only for them, and that is prohibited. So, according to this, basically mixed use would be permitted. Question? Joel, you have a question?
Yeah, I was having a hard time unmuting. Okay, so is this considered arma for the person to say, I'm going to bake it, and then I'm going to eat some of it, and if the soldiers eat, they eat?
Right, that's the very question. It seems that this is a little more than that because, when I'm baking this particular loaf, it's possible that this entire loaf, they will be given to the child, right? Because they have a lot. And so since it's a possibility, then I can rely on that possibility. So yeah, it is a bit of a trick.
Suppose that you say, I'm going to bake a whole bunch of breads, right? I'm going to take one of them and eat it myself.
Right. But you know for sure which one? If you know which one,
that's exactly the point. You don't know, right? One of them you're going to take.
Right. You have to, you can't designate which one it's going to be. It has to be like on a random that it could be any of them. Right.
It's just that a couple of days ago, I know you said that, if it's arma, it's worse because then you're like trying trickery, right?
Yes. Okay, that's true. In some cases, trickery is not allowed. In some cases, we do make a loophole. And you could see that this must have been extreme circumstances with the soldiers there, and you don't want to be on their bad terms. So, I'm sure he looked for some way to permit it. But yes, that's exactly that's exactly what we're struggling with here, this dual use. So according to him, it's okay. Your question is really the next question of the Talmud, and because here we have a challenge to that. והתניא, מעשה בשמעון התמני, שלא בא אמש לבית המדרש בשחרית, מסעור רבי יהודה בן בבא. אמר לו, מפני מה לא באת אמש לבית המדרש? One time, you have the Shimon, he's not Temani, he's not a Yemenite, but rather there's a city in Israel called Timnah, it's mentioned in Tanakh. So he's an early Tanakh, and he didn't come to the Bet Midrash one day. So his friend, the Yehuda ben Baba, said, how come you didn't come? Or maybe it was his teacher. Says, how come? Where were you? You were absent. He's checking on him. He said, well, here's what happened. A military unit came, and came on a search mission. I guess they're in charge of collecting taxes or, searching for yet other things. Maybe they're officially collecting taxes, but they do an extra fine job and take more for themselves. And so they're about to come and pillage our city. And so here's what we did. We killed a calf for them and fed them some good steaks, and they left us in peace. So we're able to bribe them, and that we distracted them with these steaks. Okay, now that day was a Yom Tov. That's probably particularly why he asked. Usually the rabbi would give a public lecture on Yom Tov, and everyone was expected to be there. So he's like, what happened? Why weren't you there? Okay, so he explains he saved the day. So he thought he did a good thing. But the Rav Yehuda said, Amar lo, tamea ani im lo yasa secharchem behefsetchem, she'ar amra Torah lachem, velo legoyim. It says, what you benefited by getting these soldiers away is going to be outweighed by what you're going to lose, because you now violated the Torah law. The Torah says you can only eat that which is good, lachem, right? That only what you're going to eat and not what non-Jews are going to eat. You can't cook for a non-Jew on the holiday. You can only cook for the benefit of celebrating the holiday. So only for Jews who are celebrating the holiday. So now, yeah, you saved, you won the battle, but you're going to lose the war. Okay, pretty harsh words. And here the point is that even though they might eat it also, the Jews might eat some of it also, right? They kill the whole calf. And so what? The Jew just has to eat a little bite, and that would be sufficient to say, we killed the calf for the Jews and for the non-Jews, and that's okay. So what is the problem? How come he is more machmir and doesn't allow this, loophole, whereas Rav Huna here permitted the loophole? So, and this is Rav Huna's an Amorah. This is a Baraita. So Rav Huna is going to have to answer for this. Amar Rav Yosef, I get terefa havai. Oh, that case, it was a non-kosher cow. It was terefa was going to die, so therefore it was only suitable to be eaten by the non-Jews, and the Jew really couldn't eat it, and that's why it was a problem. Okay, so basically we're agreeing with Rav Huna. But next question, they could have taken the Jews could have taken a piece of it and given it to their pet dogs, and then that would be permitted to give it to their dogs. So now we're assuming that you are allowed to make food for your pet, which is interesting because above it sounded like you weren't allowed to. But anyway, this would answer the question. This would actually bring back up the question, and because according to this, it would be why did he say such harsh words? Why couldn't he answer and say, well, we know we killed it for give a piece to the dog, and that's permitted, and then the rest will be for the soldiers, and who cares? So the answer is Tana'ehi. It's actually two opinions among the Tana'im about whether you're allowed to prepare food for your pet. The Tanya, you're allowed to cook for yourselves. So on the one hand, it says lechol nefesh, whatever is good for any being, you can make for yourselves. So from the word any being, that's an inclusive term. And that would mean even the word nefesh doesn't only mean a human being, it also means any being, as we see in the pasuk in Vayikra, someone who kills the being of an animal being has to pay for it. So I would have thought maybe I'm allowed to cook for animals. Tamud lomar lachem. Lachem velo lichlavim debere bioseh galidi. So the word lachem is exclusionary. It says no, you cannot. You can only cook for humans and not for dogs. However, Rabbi Akiva omer afilu nefesh behema b'mashma. Im ken matamud lomar lachem velo legoyim. So Rabbi Akiva says no, even animals I'm allowed to cook for. And so the word lachem comes to exclude that I can't cook for non-Jews, but I can cook for an animal. Now, what's the difference? Why would you include animals but exclude non-Jews? The difference is I'm going to include dogs because I'm responsible for them, right? They are dependent on me. I'm their owner, and they can't go to the store and buy food, right? So I have to. They're part of my household. Whereas the non-Jews, I'm not responsible to feed them. They can go get their own food, and therefore I don't have to cook for them. Therefore, I'm not allowed to cook for them, and that would be the difference. So this would explain why earlier in the Talmud we were assuming that if you cook for the dogs, it's not good. But here we did provide one. We saw one response that says, "Wait, how come they could cook for dogs? So it should be allowed." No, but it must be that Rabbi Yehuda followed the other opinion that said Rabbi Yosef that says you're not allowed to cook for dogs, and that's why he gave him a hard time and said you should not have killed this calf for the soldiers because it was a non-kosher one. And so it would not be permitted for the Jews. And also he thinks that you cannot cook for dogs. And so that's why in that case, he said you should not have killed the calf, not even for not for those soldiers. So there's no loophole in that case. And that would resolve that the question, because in Rav Huna's case, there was a resolution. Some of those loaves of bread could have been eaten by Jewish kids. And so that's fine. If they could be eaten, that's fine. But if they couldn't be eaten, like it wasn't kosher, then it would not be allowed. Okay, so that resolves that question. Now, Amar le'Abaye Rav Yosef, u'Rabbi Yosef galid demar lachem v'lo leklavim, hanes sufle lechevata hechi shadinan lehu beyom tov. According to the Rabbi Yosef Gali, who we just saw, who is stringent and said you're allowed to cook for yourselves, but not for dogs. Well, here's the question: what about the pits of dates on Yom Tov? How can we throw them out? In other words, if you think that dog food is okay, so then these pits that we finished with, So even since they can be used for dogs, so they're not mukseh. So therefore, we're allowed to handle them. So after we're done with them and they're on the table, then we can clean off the table and put them somewhere else because they're still useful to feed to the dogs. But if you say I'm not allowed to do anything on Yom Tov for the benefit of dogs, then they become mukseh as soon as I'm done with them because they're not human food anymore. So his answer is, they are still fit for human use because I can use them as fuel to burn. I could throw them in the fire, and you're allowed to make fuel for fire on Yom Tov, and therefore I can still clean them up, and they're not mukseh. That's fine for dry pits, but that are flammable. But ones that are still moist, that you put them in the fire, they're not going to burn. What about those? A big fire that if it's hot enough, that will dry them out and they'll burn, and that's okay. All right, tenach b'yom tov b'Shabbat. That's good on Yom Tov when you're allowed to make a fire. On Shabbat, you're not allowed to add fuel to a fire. So then, in that case, what would be the use of the date pits? And then how could you clean them? So on Shabbat, what you have to do is you'd have to take the date pits after you're done with them, put them on a piece of bread. And then, since the bread is not mukseh, when I want to clean it off, I just take the entire piece of bread and then I take it into the kitchen, and I could dispose of the pits, not the bread. I mean, the bread's still fine, the bread's still edible, so I'm not doing anything wrong with the bread, and that's a loophole. That's a way to be able to dispose of them. Upliga de Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Damar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, mizamenin et hagoy b'Shabbat, ve'en mizamenin et hagoy b'Yom Tov, gezerah shema yerbeh b'shvilo. Okay, now what we said above, which is that Rav Huna, who said that I'm allowed to cook the bread for the non-Jewish soldiers, since some of it will be eaten by the Jewish kids, and so the mixed use is permitted. That's Rav Huna's opinion, but it does not agree with Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, because he says that you are allowed to invite a non-Jew for Shabbat meal, but you may not invite a non-Jew for a Yom Tov meal, because you may come to add more food for his sake. On Shabbat, when you're not cooking at all, you're just heating up food that was already cooked. And so therefore, there's no problem. You're not cooking for yourself. You're not cooking for anyone. So non-Jews can come and he'll enjoy the meal with you. But on Yom Tov, when you're allowed to cook only for a Jew, and now you might come and say, oh, who's coming? Our non-Jewish neighbor. I know he likes apple pie, so I'm going to go make him an apple pie, right? Because I want to give him honor. No, that's a problem, because then I'm cooking only for him. And so you see that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi takes the more stringent approach compared to Rav Huna. Rav Acha bar Yaakov Amar, afilu b'Shabbat nami lo mishum shiurei kosot. Okay, by the way, the halacha is like this, is stringent. It is a problem to invite a non-Jew over on Yom Tov. We'll see, yeah. However, we'll see more about it. Okay, hold on to that. Afilu b'Shabbat nami lo mishum shiurei kosot. So Rabbi Acha says not allowed to invite a non-Jew even for a Shabbat meal. You know why? Because you're gonna offer wine, and you pour everybody wine, and then this non-Jew, in those days most of them were idolaters, is going to have some wine in his glass, and if a non-Jew touches wine, then it becomes yayin nesech. It's prohibited, and then you can't even clean off his cup, because now it's mukseh. There's no use for you. Okay, so that's his question. That's his statement. So you wouldn't be able to invite even for Shabbat. Hold on, then even our cups. When someone's finished with a cup, with the leftovers at the bottom are disgusting. Nobody else is going to drink that wine, the leftover wine at the bottom, and so you say that's mukseh also. No, didan chazur tanigolin. For ours, you can feed it to the chickens, the extra wine at the bottom. It's disgusting for humans, but chickens are fine with it. Tidhu nameh chazur tanigolin. So fine. So the non-Jews leftover wine also you could feed to the chickens. No, tidhu isureh hana'ahu ninhu. Those, because it could be yayin nesech, that would be prohibited even to get any benefit from it. So you would not be able to even give it to the chicken. Says no use, mukseh, and therefore you wouldn't be able to clean off the table, and that's why you can't invite them in the first place. Oh, wait a second, we can clean off the table another way. You're allowed to take the glass, right? The glass is usable. I want to use it for something else. I'll wash it out, and I want to drink from it myself. So I can handle the leftover wine because it's being held by the cup, which is permitted. Right? Then Rava say that you can take a kanuna is a coal pot. It's a pot here on the bottom that we put coals in it and use it to heat up water. So the thing, after I'm done with it, in the pot there'll be ashes. Now ashes people would use to use for covering things, to clean up. If there's dirt on the floor, you put ashes on it. So ashes are not mukseh, but the pot is mukseh because you can't cook on Shabbat. And he said that I'm allowed to move this pot because the ashes are permitted. So as long as and even if there are pieces of wood in it, and the pieces of wood are mukseh, they have no use, I'm allowed to carry the whole thing because in it is something that is permitted. So therefore, as long as you have a mixture of things that are not mukseh and mukseh, you're allowed to move it. And so the same thing should be with this cup with leftover wine from the non-Jew. I should be able to move it because the cup is not mukseh, right? No, hatam lav isure hana'anin hu hana'anin hu hachai isure hana'anin hu. Those are that's just mukseh. This is a higher level of mukseh because I'm not allowed to derive any benefit from that wine. So it's interesting. The fact that you can't derive benefit from it means that it's even a higher level of mukseh, and I cannot move it, not even together with its own cup. Where you should still be allowed to move it, just like you can move a chamber pot. A chamber pot is mukseh, has no use, but the rabbis gave special permission to move it out because it's disgusting, it's smelly, and so you want to get it out of your living room, that's permitted. So this should be the same thing. It's disgusting to have dirty glasses on your table. You want them out of there. Okay, but that's different. A chamber pot, if there's someone that lives in your house who needs a chamber pot, okay, what could you do? But you don't on purpose set up a situation where you're going to have it in your house. And so here, that's, that you have a choice, but here you have a choice. You don't have to invite this non-Jew in the first place. So there, don't set yourself up for such a situation where you can have dirty cups on the table, and then you're going to have to move them because they're disgusting. So therefore, just don't get into the problem to begin with. All right, and we have the bottom line. Halacha adebare Rava leMoshe Shmuel bedarash. Rava authorized Moshe Shmuel to give the public lecture, and he said as follows: whatever a sage would say in a public lecture, that became known as halacha l'maaseh. That's where everybody would have to be there. And he said, "Mezamin et hagoy b'Shabbat." Even despite everything we said, all these problems, you are allowed to invite a non-Jew on Shabbat, and you'll figure out how to deal with the mukseh problem. Then but not, you cannot invite the non-Jew on Yom Tov because you're going to go and make a special dish for him in his honor. So here's a way out of it. So if these two sages, if a non-Jew came to their house on Yom Tov, they would tell him, listen, you're invited to eat with us, but just know that we're not, whatever we worked, whatever we prepared, if you're good with that, then that's fine, because we're not going to do any extra work for you. Okay, they're saying this so that the person won't get insulted. Usually it's in some important non-Jewish friend or politician, whoever. And so usually you'd make something special. If you tell them that, listen, you came over, if you're happy with what we already prepared, then you're welcome to come, but we're not allowed to prepare anything special for you. And if he's okay with that, then you can invite him in, because then you don't have a worry that you're going to go ahead and make something special for them. So this is also halacha l'maaseh, that if Nanju happens to be passing by and wasn't invited, so you didn't have him in mind, so then you can invite him. The Rishonim discuss whether you actually have to say this formula out loud, or the point is that it's implicit. If he just came over, so then he knows that you didn't make anything special for him, right? He just popped in last minute, and so that would be permitted. Another thing that's permitted is also if you have non-Jewish help in the house, a housekeeper, because in that case, you know that she's eating whatever is prepared already, and we're not making a special dish on her account, so that would be permitted as well. Okay, so very interesting and practical. And next Mishnah, Bet Shammai Omedim Lo Yachem Adam Chamin Raglav Elam Ken Reuyin L'Shtiyah Ubet Hillel Matirin Oseh Adam Medura Mitchamem Kenegda. Bet Shammai says you're not allowed to heat up water to wash your feet. You want to wash your feet in warm water? Not allowed unless they are fit for drinking. So according to Bet Shammai, you're allowed to heat up water for drinking, only something that's ochel nefesh, but not for other purposes. Well, Bet Hillel Matirin, they say it's okay. So Bet Hillel has the principle that since you're allowed to heat up water for the purpose of drinking, it's also permitted for other uses. So therefore, you can go ahead and take water and warm it up specifically to warm your feet, even though you're not going to drink any of it. Bet Hillel says it's totally fine. Bet Shammai says no. And then we have a last line. It's not clear if Bet Hillel is saying this or if everyone's saying this, that you can make a big fire to get warm. So this fire, again, is not made for eating and drinking. It's not for cooking, but only for yourself to have heat. So we're going to see that this is only the opinion of Bet Hillel because it's not a food-related need. Now, question. Man katanila. So that's a question. This last line, who says it? Divra kolhi v'shanilhu lebet Shammai ben hanat kol gufol hanat eber ehad. Maybe even Bet Shammai would agree that you can make a large bonfire, and he makes a difference between something that benefits your whole body. In that case, that's like ochel nefesh. Your whole body is getting warm, and that's permitted. Whereas the first one is only one limb, only your legs, and so that in that case he would say no. So maybe Bet Shammai would agree with this last law. Or dilma Bet Hillel katani about Bet Shammai lo shani lehu. Or maybe this is a continuation of Bet Hillel's words that not only can you do heat up water for your legs, but also a big fire for your whole body. And Bet Shammai would not agree with it. That's our question. And the answer is Tashema Bet Shammai omerim lo yaseh adam medura v'yitchamem kenegda uBet Hillel matirin. Bet Shammai says you cannot make a big fire for heat, and Bet Hillel says you are allowed. So you see that this halacha is only according to Bet Hillel. Bet Shammai requires you to make a fire only for food. Okay, good. One halacha l'maaseh aspect here is Bet Hillel says you can warm up food for your legs. Now for your feet. Why your feet? What if you want to wash your whole body? Well, in the olden days, they didn't wash their whole bodies on a regular basis. Maybe once a week they went to the bathhouse, but they would wash their feet on a regular basis. So therefore, you need, in order for it to be allowed, it has to be if it's not for food, it has to be something that's something that most people do and most people enjoy and get benefit from. And so since most people wash their feet every day, so Bet Hillel would allow that. But in the olden days, he may not have allowed washing your entire body and heating up more water for that because it's not a general need. So that would seem to have been the law back then. So now the question is, how about nowadays, where most people do take a shower or a bath, warm one every day? So now, does that change the definition of shaveh l'chol nefesh and make it permitted to bathe on Yom Tov one's entire body? And there are different opinions among the poskim in that regard. Okay, let's just do the Mishnah, the next one, and we'll leave the discussion for tomorrow. The Mishnah says, Shelosha devrim Rabban Gamliel machmir k'divrei Bet Shammai. So Rabban Gamliel, even though he was part of the line of the Nasi and from part of the line from Hillel, so in general, he did follow Hillel like the rest of the rabbis did. Nevertheless, regarding three things, he was stringent like Bet Shammai. Here's number one, En tomnin tachamin nachatechila b'yom tov. So you have hot water. This is related to the previous Mishnah that you have on Yom Tov. You heat it up on Yom Tov, and let's say the next day is Shabbat. and you want to have hot water for Shabbat. So the way to do that would be that you take the pot and you insulate it so that it'll stay warm for the next day. Now that looks like you're preparing from Shabbat to from Yom Tov to Shabbat. So Bet Shammai says no, you can't do that on Yom Tov for Shabbat. Many versions of the Mishnah do not have the word lechatechila. Doesn't really add anything. Okay, so that's one thing. The Gemara will discuss it. You cannot put together a menorah on Yom Tov. Let's say the pieces fell apart of your candelabrum. You can't put it back together. Bet Shammai thinks that would be called binyan, building. He says there is such a thing as building. Even with vessels. And you cannot make these very thick loaves of bread. And that's the reason there, because it requires a lot of work to make it. Rather, you could only make thin loaves. Okay, so those are the three things. Says in my father's house, the previous Nasi, they would never make thick loaves, rather only thin ones, because even though you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov, you can't do a lot of work. You should do a lot of work. Although these are all Bet Shammai. Bet Hillel would permit all of these things. Amru lo ma naaseh lebet avicha shehayu mechmidin al atzman umekilin lechol Yisrael liot ofin pitin gedisin v'chadarin. And they told Ben Gamliel, what can we do with your father's house? They were very stringent upon themselves, but they were lenient for others, so that they would bake thick loaves. Everyone else they would allow to bake thick loaves, even on coals. So you see, this is interesting. The reason that Rabban Gamaliel was tolerated for following Bet Shammai. Generally, you're not supposed to. I mean, at some point, no, they made a declaration. You can't follow Bet Shammai anymore. But they tolerated it because they only did it for themselves. They're stringent for themselves. But if anyone came and asked them, is this the halacha for everyone else? They would say, no, we're stringent on ourselves. But for everyone else, they said, follow Bet Hillel and follow the lenient opinion. So sometimes they would make a distinction. And so it's okay to be stringent on oneself as long as you don't declare that to be the halacha that everyone else also has to do it. And we'll see the discussion of this Mishnah tomorrow. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen. Amen.